Mute.
Yes, Mr. Rami.
As the court pleases, firstly, my lord, I must offer our profound apologies for the late start this afternoon. We did lose track of time and then encountered traffic. I've instructed my team to appoint a timekeeper for the next occasion, and we will endeavour not to be late again.
Okay.
My lord, our next witness for this afternoon is Fatima Yusuf Ghani Sakur. She's also a virtual witness, I believe, testifying from Durban, and she's agreed to make herself available this afternoon. My lord, her statement is already part of the record. My lord, you'll find it at Exhibit G20, so that's Bundle G, at page 1517.
1517.
Yes, my lord.
Are we ready? Please state your full names, Doctor.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My full name is Fatima Yusuf Ghani Sakur.
Do you have any objection to take the prescribed oath?
Not at all.
Do you swear that the evidence you shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Say so, help me God.
I agree.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
As the court pleases. Dr. Sakur, thanks again for making yourself available. I know that you had to squeeze this testimony in amongst all your other professional obligations. Can we start off by asking you to describe to the court your current professional status?
I am a dentist by profession. Working part-time because I'm semi-retired, so I only work in the mornings and sometimes now and then in the afternoon, but most of the time it's mornings.
And can you describe your educational qualifications?
I have a BDS degree from Nagpur University in India, and also a postgraduate oral surgery qualification from Pretoria University in South Africa.
And can you indicate to the court your relationship with Dr. A.B. Gangat?
A.B. Gangat was, initially he was a friend, we were classmates, and then we married. We got married in 1972.
And did you come from a political family?
Yes, very much so. We all believed, in spite of the apartheid regime being in, we believed strongly in the ANC and hoping that freedom would arrive at some stage.
And how did you and Dr. Gangat get to meet Hoosen Haffejee?
Haffejee joined Nagpur Dental School in 1971. We were already about 2 or 3 years his senior. That's how we met.
And do you have any particular recollection of Hoosen Haffejee while in India in terms of recalling him as a person?
Pardon, I didn't understand that.
Do you have any recollections of Dr. Haffejee while you were with him in India what kind of person
Oh,
he was?
yes. I knew him very well. He was my junior. He was a very bright person, full of energy and always wanting to do something. And we all loved having him around. He was a very good company. Everyone loved him. So the college was very happy to have him there, and so were all of us.
In terms of your recollections of him at that time, how would you describe him? Was he happy, a stable kind of person?
Yes, he was very stable. He spoke in sense. He spoke quite wide. He had a wide knowledge of everything, and we all spoke quite openly about about Mr. Mandela and Dr. Daru, Dr. Kachalia, because I lived in Johannesburg for a long time, and right next to the building where I stayed was the Red Square, where the ANC used to now and then have their meetings. And I was very young, but my dad used to know Dr. Daru and Dr. Kachalia and all of them. So it was like an open discussion. It wasn't anything that we were hiding, So he was quite open about his discussion when we did meet, but I didn't meet him that often because he was my junior. I think my husband knew him better than I did.
Do you recall?
Sorry, I have to tell you this, that they played cricket together. They also played a few other sports like hockey and soccer. So I think from that point of view, my husband knew him far better than I did.
Right. Did you have any discussions of a political nature with him?
Not, in a serious sense. It was always in passing that, what do you think about what's happening in South Africa at the moment? And so we would just discuss the latest news that was happening there, but nothing in depth.
So when did you and your husband return to South Africa? And on your return, what did the two of you do?
We came back to South Africa in 73, because that's when we qualified. We married in 72, but went back to India, qualified in 73 and came back. But we were qualified graduates that had no jobs, so we decided to go to the UK.
And what did you do in the UK?
I wrote my statutory exam, and my husband was waiting to write it as well. So I was on the register in Britain to practice. And we didn't want to come back, but, family, my mother was here, and my family kept calling us back, so we returned to South Africa in 1965.
And then with your UK qualifications, were you able to get recognition in South Africa and gain employment?
No, I didn't get any recognition. So we came to South Africa and then we went back to the UK. And when we came back from the UK, they promised me a job at King Edward, so that's how I managed to get a job. So when I came back, I was working at King Edward, yes. But they didn't recognize my qualification because I had to write an exam in order to work in private practice. So while I worked in hospital, they didn't mind not writing the exam.
And your husband, did he obtain employment as well?
Yes, we both worked at King Edward.
And what did he work as?
He's also a dentist. We both qualified together, and we both had a job at King Edward in 1965.
Now, in your statement, you make reference to an incident that your husband had to endure on the 4th of August, 1977, which involved his kidnapping and assault by the Special Branch, also known as the Security Branch. Can you describe what happened as he related it to you?
Well, what happened was that he worked at King Edward, and I was About a month before, I was sent to RK Khan, which is another hospital in Chatsworth, to open a new dental department. So I was at King Edward and at RK Khan, and he was at King Edward. And we both had left in the morning together, so I knew he'd be at the hospital. But in the morning, I received a call from one of the dentists who works with my husband, that my husband had disappeared. And that could have been just around 9:30 or so, I'm not sure, and nobody could find him. So I rushed off to King Edward from RK Khan. I saw his car was still there and that he wasn't. So we got a bit worried, that what had happened. And we looked around everywhere, called all the friends and told, got my brother involved. So everybody was hunting for him. Later on, when we did find him, he did relate to me that two guys barged into the tea room at King Edward and asked him whether he knew Haffejee. And when he said yes, that's when they said, okay, he must follow them to their car there. And then they said nothing else. And of course, they had shown him his ID, so he knew that they were from the special branch. So he followed them to the car, and once they got into the car, they put a hood over his head, and they just took off to an unknown place. And during that ride to this unknown place, they kept asking him what did they discuss over the phone the day before Haffejee was taken from where he was working. So my husband kept telling them that, they just discussed the day's working schedule and so on. And also, Haffejee had a problem with his girlfriend or something, so they were talking more about that, but nothing else. But they wouldn't believe him, and they kept repeating the question over and over again that he must try and remember what Haffejee had to say. But anyway, we finally reached this unknown place. When they got into the room, they took the hood off, and they again insisted and told my husband that, you are both communists, and are you planning an unrest in the country or to overthrow the government? And my husband said, no, nothing of that sort. We are not communists at all, And then they wanted to know whether Haffejee indulged in making bombs and whether he was going to blow up any strategic places or not. And to which, of course, my husband replied in the negative, and they weren't too happy about it. So then they sent him into another room, which was very dark and cold, and they asked him to strip. And he had to take all his clothes off, and I'm not sure at which stage, when they were in the first room or the second room, but they kept pushing his head into a bucket of water or a container of water, and he felt like he was getting an electric shock. And they kept doing this for almost 45 minutes, and then when he stripped, they tied his hands up behind his back and his feet together, and hung him from something upside down. So his head was down, and that hanging like that for almost an hour, when they kept on asking him about Haffejee making bombs and what were they going to do. They are both communists, and why doesn't he accept that he is a communist and so is Haffejee? My husband said he couldn't identify with what they were saying. So he said, no, they are not communists. They are just dentists, and he doesn't know anything about Haffejee, because Haffejee never spoke to him about bombs or about being a communist. And their discussion over the phone was very basic. Anyway, when they couldn't get that out, then they started beating him all over his body with some object. He couldn't make out what it was. And his feet, they hit him a lot on his feet, on his shin and on his thigh. And of course, he was dehydrated because he didn't have anything to eat since breakfast. And it took about an hour. And when they couldn't get anything that they were trying to find out, then they took him down and they asked him to dress up, and they put him in a car and they dropped him off in somewhere in Allegheny Road. Because he had a hood on, he couldn't see where they were taking him. But when they dropped him off, they pushed him out of the car, so he hit, the curb, and he went and sat on the curb. But and that's how a friend of ours found him, sitting over there, quite disoriented and dehydrated, and of course couldn't see the injury marks because he was already dressed.
The friend who found him, was that Mr. Farouk Mullah?
That's right, yes.
I'll just ask, at that time, was your husband politically active or involved?
Well, we all had just, knew what we wanted in politics, but we weren't actively involved. We weren't causing any problems. We weren't protesting. We discussed things between us. Of course, we knew about Mozi Mullah, and they had come to India, and we knew about them. They were looking for, they wanted to know if I had, because later on they wanted to know from my husband and whether I have the Sushaba magazine, which we had read while we were in India. We knew about it. So, there was really nothing that they could put their finger on.
And your husband wasn't connected to any underground organizations such as the ANC or the SACP?
No, not at all.
You mentioned that your husband indicated to you that they had showed their identification cards to him.
Yes.
Was he able to mention the names of those police officers to you?
No, he couldn't. In fact, I was so engrossed in trying to see how he was doing. At that moment, I didn't even ask him what the names were, But and he never mentioned it. But there were two of them.
Did he mention if they were white officers or Indian officers, perhaps?
Yes, they were white.
But both were white. Okay.
Both were white. Yes.
And at what point did you and your husband get to learn about the arrest and death and detention of Dr. Haffejee?
On the day that my husband spoke to him, I think was the 1st of August, and on the 2nd, Haffejee was taken in by the special branch. And immediately it spread through the grapevine and everyone got to know about it. So I think we probably heard of it the next day. Well, it could have been the 3rd, 2nd or the 3rd, I'm not sure, that he was arrested, And we were quite worried about it because, we were wondering what was behind it all.
But at the time of your husband's abduction, would he have known by then that Dr. Haffejee had died?
No, my husband was arrested on the 4th, and on the 5th, I decided, that I could see all the injuries that were on his leg and on his knee and all over, and his eyes were bloodshot on the day when I picked him up from my brother's shop. That was on the 4th. So on the 5th, we decided that I'll take him to a district surgeon. And we got to the district surgeon, who, of course, examined him and said he couldn't find anything, and that the bloodshot eyes were, of course, normal, and there was nothing wrong with him. So we were quite disappointed because he didn't even take any notes or anything, and he just sent us off. So when we left, then we got to my brother's shop, and a friend of ours called on my brother's telephone to speak to us, and that's when they told us that Haffejee had passed away. And we were told that he had committed suicide, which we just couldn't believe,
I'm going to return to that. Do you remember the name of the district surgeon, perchance?
No, I can't remember. I can't even remember which road it was that we went to, but it was close to the harbour. Could have been Stanger Street, I'm not sure.
Right. So notwithstanding the visible injuries that your husband displayed, the district surgeon took the view that nothing was amiss.
Yeah, he said there's nothing wrong. He said he can't see anything wrong. So I was trying to be a bit. I was showing my anger, so I spoke a little loud, and I told him, I said, you know what, you must be blind not to see, that he's got the same bruises on his leg, especially on his feet and on his knee, and he's limping, because he was limping from that injury. So he said, no, all this could have been because he plays cricket and this and that, And besides that, he said, please don't speak to me like that, because I can see.
Do you recall whether your husband had any linear-shaped injuries on the back of his legs after the torture he endured?
Well, on his just on his calf area and at the back of his thigh, I could see horizontal lines, not really dark, but they were there.
Right.
They were reddish and in color.
And those injuries that looked from lines, did you and your husband get a sense of where they had come from?
Well, we thought it could have been, because it wasn't, probably wasn't a sharp object. It couldn't have been a wooden object. It could have been a rubber band or whatever, like a work or whatever. We're not sure.
You mentioned that your husband told you that he had been suspended. You said exactly, they tied his hands and feet behind him and then hung him upside down by his feet. And then while he was hanging there, he was beaten. So he probably was hanging from some object by his legs.
He couldn't make out what object it was because it was dark. So whether there were rafters there or whatever, he's not sure.
Right. Well, possibly the linear injuries could have come from that incident.
It could at the ankle area, but I think on the on the calf and the behind the thigh, it could have been something that was used to whip him or hit him or whatever,
You mentioned that you came to learn that there was a phone at King Edward Hospital that had been bugged by the security branch, and that the discussions between your husband and Dr. Haffejee had been picked up. How did you learn that?
It was long afterwards that we realized that they could have only known my husband was speaking to Haffejee on that day, because the phone could have been tapped, And we also had a friend by the name of Johnny Swanepoel, who worked as a plumber at King Edward Hospital, and he became a very close friend of ours. He used to pop in now and then while I was there, before I was sent to RK Khan, to have tea with us. And then later when I left RK Khan, he used to come and speak to my husband. And at the Truth and Reconciliation meeting, he mentioned something that the phone could have been tapped, or whether he tapped it or not, I'm not sure. But while he used to come and sit and speak to my husband, I think he used to talk about things, and he was almost like a spy, trying to find out things which we didn't realize initially. So when my husband was picked up, and later we realized that maybe Johnny Swanepoel was involved, he did apologize to us that yes, he was, planted there to find out what we were up to.
And you mentioned a little earlier that you couldn't believe that Dr. Haffejee had committed suicide. Why couldn't you believe that?
No, he was a very vibrant person, and whenever we spoke to him, he embraced life to such an extent that he wouldn't stoop to that level. Besides that, being a Muslim, committing suicide is against our religion. And he knew about it, I know about it, and we always discuss that. From the religious point of view, one should never take their own lives. So I assume that even in detention or being under whatever threat, he would never do such a thing. You know.
Did you and your husband come under any surveillance after the death of Dr. Haffejee?
Yeah, I think we were being followed, and we had lots of phone calls to my maid, asking her who comes to the house, and there were times at at a party we would find some people watching us. When we left, they would leave as well, and so as a result, because my maids were getting these phone calls, they would leave. And I had a young son who needed to be looked after at home while I was working. So I had to take him with me to Arki Khan and keep him in the office while I worked in the surgery. So it had come to that extent where I was actually afraid that they were, following us.
Dr. Secure, before we close, is there anything else you would like to bring to the attention of this Honourable Court?
No, I think I'm quite okay. I'm just becoming a bit too emotional now, but I think I've said what I've said is enough. I'm just so sorry that Haffy had to lose his life, but he was an innocent person who had no harm to the country, even if he was thinking in the lines, but he had made no moves at all. He was a very young person, very vibrant. He hadn't even started his life yet and hadn't seen anything, what it felt like to work as a qualified person, and his life was shortened by suspicious people who reported him. I don't know for whatever reason, and I think that person, whoever reported him, should be called in and dealt with.
Thank you, Doctor.
But also one more thing, having seen the injuries on my husband, which was quite bad. I mean, he really felt a lot of pain. I can imagine what trauma Haffejee must have gone through in order to lose his life, He couldn't have done all that to himself,
Thank you, Doctor. We greatly appreciate
I hope the family
your time.
gets the justice and that they will now finally, live to rest. Thank you so much.
No further questions, my Lord.
Mr. MacDonald?
No, thank you, my Lord. No questions.
Thank you, Doctor, for giving us your time. You may be excused.
Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Your Honor.
My Lord, that was our last witness for today. As discussed previously with my Lord, our learned friend for the state is getting his second vaccination tomorrow, and I believe one or two others might be doing that as well. So there are no witnesses scheduled for tomorrow, my Lord. But on Wednesday we have another virtual hearing arranged, and we will have the second forensic pathologist, that's Dr. Shakira Holland, who'll be testifying from Johannesburg. Lord, I do wish to bring to the court's attention the issue around another witness who was meant to testify on Thursday. That's Mr. Haroon Aziz. He was originally going to be a virtual witness testifying today, but then he advised the instructing attorney and Advocate MacDonald that he would prefer to testify in court. And we were under the impression that he would make arrangements to come down to Johannesburg, to come down from Johannesburg to Pietermaritzburg. We only learnt, I believe it was last night, that he wanted his trip funded. My Lord, from the side of the family, we're not in a position to fund his trip. and I understand from the perspective of the state that they would prefer him to testify virtually. We then spoke to Mr. Aziz earlier today to see whether he could testify this afternoon, but he was unable to testify this afternoon as he had another engagement. So, my Lord, the best we can do is to have him on standby for Wednesday afternoon, and if we do finish with Dr. Holland early enough, then we can deal with Mr. Aziz. But if we can't, then unfortunately we're not in a position to pay for yet another virtual hearing day. So in that case, we have spoken to Advocate MacDonald for the state and suggested that in that case we'll simply have to rely on his written statement.
Yeah. Okay then. Okay then, I'll adjourn the proceedings then to the 1st of, either the 1st of September.
As a
Right.
copy.
Yes. Okay. Court is adjourned.